great pleasure to be speaking to an audience of leaders and aspiring leaders, I imagine. And I'm pleased to say that much of what I'm going to talk about follows on very nicely from what we've just heard. It's sort of perfect segue in some ways, particularly that point about CIOs and CEO relationships and CIOs and boards, as it were. You know, I don't know about you, but when I read an opinion piece in the paper, you know, in the FT or something, I always want to know, who is this person anyway? It's, you know, so in a sense, it's all very well introducing me as the incoming president, and I'm really looking forward to that. That should happen, all being well, in early March. But you probably want to know a little bit more about what shaped my ideas in order to know what weight to put on them as you use your critical thinking. And I will come back to that. The way I want to deal with the topic this afternoon, Brian, is I want to call it the digital challenge, if I may, or more precisely, perhaps, the digital leaders challenge. Both, and you can put the apostrophe there in both places, so both individually and collectively. And the subheading is from survive to prosper, because I think business continuity and all that is obviously is all very well, but we've got to go beyond that. And we're talking about sort of prospering too. And I guess I want to deal with sort of a number of aspects of that. So following on from what we just heard, really, thinking mainly about how we, or you as digital professionals, help your organizations, first of all, survive and then prosper. But of course, the sum of all our organizations is our economy and a large chunk of our society too. So by doing that job with our organizations, I think we do a very good job for the economy as well. And of course, it's, as we just heard from Eileen, it's relevant to us as individuals too. And finally, I want to see if I can, you know, mix all of this together and finish with a bit of a, so what's BCS's angle on this in the year ahead. Let me come back to what shaped me, so you know where I'm coming from. All right, so I did maths, further maths and physics at A levels, and then I did a maths and physics degree. And you might be thinking, as many people did at the time, well, that's not a very rounded person then at that stage, is it? And I went then, as many of us were lucky to do, I went off on this 10-week management course at Cranfield, great place, and introduced me to this novel concept of behavioral science. I mean, at first I thought, what is all this namby-pamby soft stuff? Give me the hard data science. But it actually did help me to be a better systems analyst and project manager, although I did quite soon return to the comfort of numbers by studying for a postgrad accounting qualification. But there's a reason for me talking about that sort of behavioral science and soft stuff. I mean, I was interested to note in the survey, I think, Brian, that an increasing importance being placed on these softer skills in the jobs that we do and the jobs that you as IT leaders do. The next part, well, really the last part of my career, for many years, maybe 20 years now, has been spent as a professional advocate of IT. First as the Director General of Tech, what is now Tech UK, it was Intellect then, and then in Brussels doing the same thing on a Europe-wide basis in Digital Europe. And the accepted wisdom, and there's an awful lot of truth in it, is that you need evidence to support arguments for officials, but as well as that, you need stories for politicians. And that's not being disparaging at all, but it's just, you do need to put this in sort of, you need to put things in real life terms. And that once again reinforced for me the need to have a blend of both analytical and intuitive thinking. And I believe that becomes ever more important. And why is that relevant to us as IT leaders? I think it's particularly relevant because many of the things that we're having to deal with today, many of the issues we're dealing with, are caused by the way people feel about our technologies. And so we need to deploy the intuitive part of our brain. Some years ago at Digital Europe, I was lucky enough to have as my president at the time, the then CEO of Philips Consumer Electronics Division, Philips Consumer Electronics. And we were having a drink one night after a board meeting and we were talking about his company. And he said, you know, the trouble with Philips Consumer Electronics is there's too much electronics and not enough consumer. And after, you know, that really sort of remark struck with me. We've got to remember in all this, the individuals and not get too carried away with that, you know, with the sort of technology part of it. I think, you know, part of my strategy constantly is to remind my analytical self, if I will, about the need to develop my feeling sensors. And as as part of doing that, as I went through, I sort of seek out the odd management book, and not many, I have to say, but the odd one. And one that really struck me was Good to Great from Jim Collins. I know he's done a few, but Good to Great really stuck out to me. And it was probably actually because the methodology was quite analytical. But I boiled this great book down into two things. One, take stock, have an accurate lie of the land. And I'm going to come back to that because I think that's quite important. And the second thing is have the right people on the bus, as he puts it. So, have the right people on the train. Interesting, picking up on sort of the comments Eileen was making. When I think what he means by this, and what I certainly mean by it, is having the right people on the bus. I don't mean on your bus as the IT leader. I mean, you've got to be on the CEO's bus. You've got to be part of that team. In 2000, I think it was 2018, I was invited to chair a CIO event, a European-wide CIO event in Amsterdam. I don't know if you can remember those days when we could travel to other countries and go to events in places like that. This was a fantastic hotel with a deck you could have a drink on that went out into the harbour. I'm really looking forward to being able to do that sort of thing again. Anyway, it was interesting that the CIOs, there are a couple of hundred CIOs, and they broke down into two camps. One, who were very much involved in the strategy of the business, they were involved in changing things, and the other half who wanted to be in that first half but weren't there yet. And there was no doubt that the people who were on that CEO's bus were the ones who felt they were in the right place and they were keenest. How do you get on that bus then? Well, I'm sure it's not for me to tell you that, but I will offer a couple of thoughts. I think the best people to ask that of are the people who are there already, like you just said from Eileen, people who have got there, and don't be shy. Ask, how did you get here? What did you have to do? But I will offer a couple of thoughts based on some experiences that I had. First of all, I would say in your leadership role, make sure you're not adding to the problems of the business or of the CEO in any way. Make sure you're in ship-shape condition. And when I've listened to people talk about business continuity through this crisis, I've often been struck by the sorts of comments along the lines of, it's not the things we did in the pandemic, it's the things we did before to improve our resilience. And I chaired an audit committee at a university for many years, actually. And it wasn't just financial audit, it was very much about identifying, minimizing, mitigating against risks. And we were always very impressed when people came to us and told us about the steps they'd taken to deal with the potential impact of any problems and help us to be more resilient. And we, whenever we found problems where we had to, oh God, we're going to have to deal with this, it's where that preparation hadn't been done properly. So first thought, don't add to the problem. Make sure you're in ship-shape condition. And I think the other thing I've heard people say that's really struck me here is sometimes you have to be quite bold about that, because you're asking for expenditure that maybe doesn't immediately support the business plan. So you've got to be bold and explain why you need to be in that place where you are then more resilient. So after that thought from my days chairing an audit committee for a university, it was a £500 million business, so not a small organization. But perhaps the more important thing of those two thoughts is now is the time to be the proactive partner. Businesses are going through phenomenal change, aren't they? I mean, we've seen we all have many examples of that. One I loved was, it's not so much in London now, but we saw it in Brussels and in many German cities where BMW and Sixt had teamed up and created this organization called Drive Now, which was, you just pick up a car at the curbside, drive it, drop it off. And I thought it was a great sort of example of an innovation that really met a need. And this was BMW adapting their business model. And there are many examples of that. And I think for BCS, the role in all this is maybe Well, apart from being a place where you can ask your colleagues, it's also about convening, it's about capturing these ideas and to some extent codifying them, as you have done in this great report. I think it's an excellent, and I'm really looking forward to, studying it more carefully. So let me come back to that first point about, so I was talking about the right people on the bus, but also the lie of the land, because I think this is a very important thing for leaders to have an accurate lie of the land. I don't know if any of you are fans of Ben McIntyre, he writes in the Times, but he also writes true stories of espionage. And in A Spy Among Friends, there are lots of instances of our security services, MI5 particularly, gathering all the intelligence and then completely failing to see its significance. And I think that's a real risk. We can gather all the intelligence, but just not work out what it means. So from our seat in the bus, we've got to work out, well, what do we see? But also, what do we make of that knowledge? And it's hard to make sense of that. Let's just go through a few of those as I see them at the moment. I mean, pandemic, obviously. Recession that's going to follow, obviously. But I was very struck that Blackstone's Larry Fink's letter to CEOs, which I think he started after the financial crisis, he really picks out this time climate change. And when I was digging into this as I have over the years, dig into this in more detail, in fact, of course, it's much greater than that. It's much richer than that. It's the whole ESG sustainability agenda. And it really does need picking into, because I think, first of all, of course, climate change, then resource degradation, but increasingly biodiversity. And many large companies are telling me that this is really now very much baked in to their medium term, if not short term, business plans. So, while there's no shortage of analysis, I mean, you can read the FT every day, the Economist every weekend, endless reports, I mean, some very good ones. Rebecca, our president from Deloitte produced great reports. There's also the things we pick up all the time, society's views on the impacts of technology on jobs. I think that's another part of the lie of the land we need to be aware of. Let me just give you a little digression here. One of the groups I really enjoy belonging to is something called, and it's just a club really, it's the Economic Singularity Club. And I suppose the sort of intellectual leader of it is a writer and futurist called Callum Chase. And this group's been meeting for a little while, trying to look forward 20 or 30 years of the impacts of automation and AI, particularly on society, but on jobs. And of course, I mean, I've been an advocate for many years of the arguments that technology produces more jobs than it destroys, and so on. But if you look out 20 to 30 years, there's no doubt that technology and AI is going to be able to do pretty much everything that we can do in the workplace today. So you really do then have to ask yourself, well, okay, for the next 10 years, that might not be a problem, but 20, 30 years, how is that going to play out? People, particularly the aspiring leaders in the middle of their careers, really need to think about that. So how do you do, and this is sort of coming a little bit to a sort of crunch idea, how do you make these judgments? When I was at university doing my maths degree, I was learning all about probability, but I was paying my way, paying my bar bills, I suppose, by working on Saturdays and in the holidays for Ladbrokes, the bookmakers. And I learned a lot about betting, mostly about, when it comes to horse racing, don't do it, because the bookmakers always win. But I learned a lot about betting, and it got me thinking a little bit that way. And there is no doubt that in business, we have to make choices. To some extent, you have to make bets. So you're not doing this landscape review for the fun of it, just to sort of intellectually entertain yourself at the weekend by reading the Economist articles. No, you're reading it because you're having to make bets and make judgments. And I really hope that today helps you make better judgments. And I hope the report that we've produced is also going to help you in making those better bets. What I'd like to end with if I might, Brian, is how is BCS going to react to the lie of the land? What analysis has the Institute done, and what is it going to focus on? One of the things that the survey seems to suggest, I think, is it argues that trust in IT is increasing. Whereas I think the BCS surveys, particularly around algorithms, found the opposite, that trust is falling and suspicion is rising. And I would say that's more the zeitgeist of the time, personally. So this will be something that's very interesting to explore. If you think about the results of the survey that the BCS commissioned of people after this, algorithms and A-level results, I would think it was 60% of people said algorithms should not be making choices for people. You know, we've got to be careful about how we use them in our lives. People are becoming more suspicious of these things. And that's really why the BCS message about professionalism is ever more important. And I think the way to describe this is that BCS is going to continually try to drive a demand for people in our field to be able to demonstrate their competence, that they behave ethically, and prove that they are professional. And it's not just for the sake of it. We don't ask our doctor to be more professional just because we want to say, oh, good, our doctors are professional. We say that because we want them to do a better job, and we believe that by being professional, we will get better outcomes. And that's the point we need to make about our profession too, that by being more professional, society will get better outcomes. So that's going to be very much the sort of, BCS is going to really reinforce its efforts in that area. The second big thing we're going to concentrate on is that we can't go on even being accused of paying only lip service to diversity. We have to really pile into this one. We've genuinely got to remove the barriers to those who find entry and success in our profession more difficult than it should be. And if you wanted to just be hard-nosed and cold about that, you could regard that as simply making sure we've got a talent pool that includes the best of the best and no one is excluded from it. And our final focus for us, given our assessment of the lie of the land, coming back to that point, is we really must play our part wholeheartedly in eradicating digital poverty. You know, BCS exists to make IT good for society, not just good for those bits of society that can access us. So the three things that BCS is going to do following its assessment of the lie of the land is drive home the demand for professionalism, really focus on removing the barriers to people who find it difficult to thrive in our, gain entry and then thrive in as practitioners, and finally eradicating digital poverty and making sure there aren't millions of people who are excluded from enjoying the benefits of IT. So in today's context, one way for BCS to do this and help achieve this is by helping you get on the bus. We want you to be on the board, steering the companies, helping you draw the right conclusions from the landscape when you examine it, and helping your organizations to survive and prosper. So thank you, Brian, and thank you, colleagues.
John, thank you very much. We enjoyed that. We appreciate your presentation. Just to clarify, 48% thought that trust in IT was slightly higher or much higher at the moment. But of course, that was voted for by pretty much mostly IT leaders.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
Might be slightly skewed.
Might be skewed, yes. Well, that's what we seriously have got to examine, Brian. And I mean, we don't want a disparity. We want to. That's a really good example of having an accurate assessment of the lie of the land.